Hello, this is Rick Jordan, the Church Resources Coordinator for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina. Welcome to today's webinar on Preaching Punchlines, the 10 Commandments of Comedy. Our presenter today is Susan Sparks, a trial lawyer turned stand-up comedian and Baptist preacher. Susan Sparks is America's only female comedian with a pulpit. She is the senior pastor of the historic Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City. Today's webinar will begin with Susan's presentation. If you have questions or comments that you would like to make during the presentation, you can enter them in the question box at any time. The question box is at the bottom of your screen, and it will pop up and ask you if you want to ask a question. And I will ask the questions at the end of her presentation. So feel free to put a question in at any time. Thank you for your participation in today's webinar. And just a reminder that this is being recorded and will be stored on the CBF North Carolina Virtual Resource Library on our website. Susan, we welcome you.
Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to the webinar today. And I also want to thank you for not just immediately hitting escape when Rick gave that introduction, because it does sound kind of wacky. Trial lawyer turned stand-up comedian and Baptist minister. But the one good thing about that is I bring a unique skill set that I'm excited to share with you today. What we're talking about with Preaching Punchlines is what I've learned as a preaching pastor and a professional comedian for, I kind of want to go blah, 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 years, but let's just call it out, 20 years of doing both. And what I've learned with that. And in fact, I wrote a book that was published by Smith and Howes this spring called Preaching Punchlines, the 10 Commandments of Comedy. And it's the 10 things, the 10 major tools that I learned as a comedian and how they translate into better communication, into transforming our preaching, and generally encouraging what I like to call joyous communication, something that I think is really needed in this world today and something that I think is really important for community and for our lives. Now, as I said, if you're interested in the book, you can check that out on Amazon or on Smith and Howes' website. This is a taste, just a little taste of the book. And if you're interested in more after the webinar today, keep an eye out, because in January, I'm going to launch a full-blown e-course on this, Preaching Punchlines, which is going to include 12 separate video learning modules. It'll have practical exercises, live phone calls with me, and coaching about how this applies to preaching. And also, and maybe most importantly, ideas of how we bring our community into this learning. You know, it's one thing to tell your community, your congregation, hey, I'm taking a course on stand-up comedy, for preaching, and that's it. It's another to say, I'm taking this course, and here's how we are going to learn from this. We're going to do this together. And so I think there's ways to bring it in to not only impact our preaching, but also our pastoral care and the nature and bounty of joy within our community. So keep an eye out. But today we're going to do, like I said, just a little taste. And as you can imagine, as a trial lawyer turned stand-up comedian and Baptist minister, I come at things with a little different lens. And especially from the trial lawyer perspective, I felt like I should protect the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina, protect them from any, expectations that weren't met. So we're going to start with a disclaimer because of the law background. So really quick, this lecture is in no way intended to imply that the pastor before you has a lock on good preaching or is even a decent preacher herself. It's simply a shameless collection of lessons learned from her years of experience as a college debater, a trial lawyer, a corporate trainer, a professional comedian, and an ordained minister, la-ti-da. Yeah, I was thinking I should get a business card that has la-ti-da at the bottom. That'd be kind of funny. But anyway, CBF North Carolina takes no responsibility for the theology and or lessons offered from the speaker and denies any accountability for the unpredictable nature of the messages presented. Okay, good. So we're all clear about that. I'd love to just start with a minute or two of a little bit of background, because usually when people hear what I do, their first question was, how did that happen? How does one become a minister and a stand-up? And, the whole arc of the story is covered much more thoroughly in the book and certainly within the course that I'm going to launch in January. But here's two little snippets that kind of give you an idea of where this came from. I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and attended a very conservative Southern Baptist church growing up that did not ordain women. Unfortunately, when I was about 5 or 6, I knew I wanted to be a preacher. Honey, I was clear about it, just clear as day. And I used to take my stuffed animals and put them in the corner and preach to them on Saturday night based on the Sunday school lesson. And then all of a sudden, I was told pretty, crystal clear by a Sunday school teacher that, no, women don't preach. Women aren't called to be preachers. So that's not a career that you can head down. And when you're 6, what do you know? I'm like, oh, okay. So the years rolled by and I kind of just took the same skill set and ended up in a different career. I became a trial lawyer, which if you think about it, is really the same job, just different clients, So anyway, long story short, started practicing law. And then I realized that these trial lawyers that I was going up against, I was in Atlanta. I was probably the only woman in an 80-man firm in employment discrimination, representing Napa parts and very male dominated area. The trial lawyers I was going up against were all good old boys who were funny. And they would get in front of those juries and say something funny or tell a story or share something that got that jury laughing, which meant immediate rapport, immediate connection, immediate respect. And then they had them. So I thought I better start studying stand-up too. And so that's where the stand-up came in. I started studying it as a lawyer for rhetorical reasons, to become a better communicator. And as probably many of you have experienced, you keep going through life and that call that you originally had, man, mine just kept coming back and kept coming back. And finally, I couldn't deny it anymore. I ended up at Union Theological Seminary. But then that's where the comedy got complicated because, honey, those professors, they were not ready to teach theology to a comedian. Like we say in the South, bless their hearts, right? But sometimes you just got to put your head down and make it work. And here I am. I'm a professional comedian and the longtime 20-year pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist Church. And I think, it's a ministry of humor that I'm quite proud of. Yet when I tell people what I do, not only do they ask, how did this happen? But then they ask, why does this make any sense? And I guess I don't really understand that disconnect because I believe we're children of a God with a sense of humor. I mean, can I have an amen? I can't hear you, but I bet the amen came back because come on, we all know this, right? I mean, the philosopher Voltaire said, God is a comedian playing to an audience who's afraid to laugh. I think about it like this. We are made in the image of the divine, and we are the only creatures that laugh. Okay, well, there's that hyena, but whatever. Human beings laugh. We're created in the image of the divine. Therefore, a piece of the divine must contain joy and laughter. I mean, to me, it's that simple. I'm just sort of tired of the church being all about judgment and shame. Maybe I should say it like this. The God I know is all about joy and hope. And that's what I'm hoping to do, is to reframe the face of the church around joy and hope using these tools that I'm going to share with you today. I guess the bottom line is this is about holistic approaches to God because, you can't be healed unless you give God all the pieces. We easily bring anger and resentment and shame into the church and put it on the altar. But we don't always bring our joy and laughter. And I'm saying bring it all because it's all holy. I guess if you wanted to condense this whole thing down into one phrase, if you don't take anything else away from today, take this. If you can laugh at yourself, you can forgive yourself. And if you can forgive yourself, you can forgive others. And there it is, kind of in a nutshell, right? So let me share with you what I hope will be tools that will help you kind of reframe your community and the face of the church into joy and laughter, joy and hope. And commandment number 1 is thou shalt get to the point. Lord have mercy, is that not true? Preachers can go on for quite some time. I grew up with a preacher that would preach for an hour without taking a breath. And wow. I don't think that's the most effective way to present a message. There's an old saying, some of you Southerners might have heard this, sermons like biscuits improve with shortening. That's true for all communication. You don't have to be a preacher for this to hit home. It's all about editing down to the absolute core of the message. Stand-up comedians have a rule: the longer the setup, the bigger the punchline. And you know, the setup for a joke is the explanation in the beginning, right? And then the punchline is the last bit that brings the laughter. A good example are email jokes. You know how you get these things from your friends who are like, oh my gosh, this is so funny, read this. And it's a forward. And you hit the scroll button and you go down, 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 down. And it takes like 10 minutes. By the time you're at the end, you're on the floor asleep. I mean, it could be the funniest punchline in the world, but it's so exhausting to get to it that it loses literally the punch. So you've got to tighten that setup, whether it's a joke or a story, even a sermon, you know, even a message that's not containing humor. The setup has to be tightened for the big point, the punchline, to hit home. You know, the bottom line is we're preaching to a soundbite generation. I love these signs. Our church admin, Brian Croson, puts these out. These are flat front to Madison Avenue, so we get a lot of foot traffic. This is one of my favorite. Tweet others as you want to tweet you. One he put up about 6 months ago that I love was a honk if you love Jesus, text while driving if you want to meet him. They just, you know, they're funny. They make people think. They make people kind of stop, take photos. But this one I wanted to put up because it's true. We're preaching to a soundbite generation. You know, I don't know about you, but we've got a community that's a wide range of ages, 97 years old down to 3 months. And sometimes the tweets and the texts and that kind of stuff don't necessarily reach or are understandable to our older audience, but they do understand brevity and they do understand getting to the point. For example, I suggest when I'm teaching this course as a workshop that you must be able to do a one-line summary of your sermon, right? Now, why? Because people remember about 10% of what we say, whether it's a sermon, a speech, a conversation, 10%. So we better decide what that 10% is up front before we take it out. I mean, maybe you've had this happen for you as a preacher. You give a sermon on forgiveness and at coffee hour, somebody goes, oh, I love that sermon that you did on sin. Who knows where they got that? But clearly we had not done our homework to put the one-line summary up front and be crystal clear about what the message is. You know, Jesus was a great editor. I love this meme I got off the internet. Okay, everyone, listen carefully. I don't want to end up with 4 versions of this. I mean, it's true, right? But when you think about how Jesus preached to his audience. He preached in a way that was short, concise messages with familiar images. And every single message that he gave was almost really kind of a 140 character tweet message that most importantly was remembered and repeated. And I hate to say it, but that's the ball game. If people don't remember what you say and then share it, what's the point? What is the point? I like to think about sometimes you're writing your sermons or messages and you just get all excited about the words you put together. I can't possibly give them up. They're just going to change the world. Well, how about this for a comparison? The Gettysburg Address had 272 words. That's it. The Lord's Prayer has 66 words. And Moses saved an entire race of people with 4 words. Let my people go. I mean, we ain't all that. We have to edit down. And the way I do it is I have a little section of my sermon at the end when I'm writing called Purgatory, which is basically, if you remember from your theology, things that are working their way to heaven but hadn't quite gotten there. So if I've got a section in there, I think, I'm not sure I think I can cut it, but I hate to do it. I just put in Purgatory. And then afterwards, I have a Purgatory file where I keep all these things. And one day they will work their way to sermon heaven, but not this one. It makes it easier to cut sometimes because it's just so hard, right? But the bottom line is we have to edit down to the absolute most important material so people will hear the information and then repeat it. Commandment 2, thou shalt craft like a comedian. In comedy, there's something called the comic threes or the comic triple. And it's a very basic formula where you set a pattern with 2 observations and then break the pattern with the third. For example, I talk about sometimes the diversity of creation. And in a funny way, I say, well, look, consider the diversity of creation. Heaven and earth, observation 1. Platypus and blowfish, observation number 2. Jerry Springer and Jerry Falwell. Observation 3 that breaks the pattern and catches people off guard and makes them laugh, or hopefully makes them laugh. I talk about Velveeta in my stand-up routine, and I say it's a versatile dish. You know, we used to put it on Ritz crackers, observation 1. We used to melt it with Rotel tomatoes for nacho dip, observation 2. We would caulk the tub with it, observation 3, that breaks the pattern and again, hopefully invites laughter. It's a very basic formula. Not only can you use it for comedy, but in terms of structuring a message, writing a blog, putting a sermon together, set the pattern with 2 things and then break it with a third that not only could possibly bring laughter, but most importantly, keep people's attention because it's unexpected. One of the things that I find important in comedy as well as preaching is cross-training. Yeah, we can read a million preaching books, and at some point, I don't know, I get kind of bored. There's great stuff out there, don't get me wrong, but I've jumped ship and looked to different disciplines to not only train me as a stand-up, but also a preacher. For example, Serena Williams said that she used to use, or she still accesses videos of Muhammad Ali's footwork for her tennis. I mean, think about that. Going outside your discipline to learn from others. I'll give you 2 examples. For me, I love to study storytelling. And of course, for those of you who don't know, this is the great Fred Craddock, Professor Fred Craddock, who was always a mentor for me. And he was a master storyteller. And I think the thing we learn as preachers and communicators and comedians from studying storytellers is detail. Detail about bringing people into the story, whether it's sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, all the senses, all the detail of the story. That's what brings scripture to life. It's what brings our stories to life, our sermons, our conversations, when there's detail, especially sensory detail. The other thing that I actually use, and you're going to laugh, is the Food Channel. Okay, I know it sounds like an excuse to watch trashy television, and maybe it is, you know, whatever. But I particularly love Chopped. I don't know if you've ever watched Chopped, but it's this competition on the Food Channel where 3 chefs are given boxes of random weird food, and they have to put it together in some beautiful dish. And I think of it like this, you know, Jesus's words in John, I am the bread of life. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. We as preachers, we are, as pastors, as Christians, as lay people, we are responsible for bringing that bread to others. So why not study something that inspires us to see things a little differently? As we watch people take unrelated ingredients and put them together in a way that's beautiful and inviting, that people want to come eat. You know, just look outside the discipline to find ways that we can learn and jump on board with other disciplines that offer us some insight. I'm not saying, you know, that you have to go out and study every possible discipline, but I think when you go out and find something different, it helps. It helps. So craft like a comedian. Think about the 3s and also look about how you can learn from other disciplines. Commandment number 3, thou shalt preach like an EKG. Now, that sounds really bizarre, but let me tell you why I call it this. We all know what an EKG looks like, right? It's a spike, medical, heart, spike, flat line, spike, flat line, spike, flat line. I think all communication, a comedy show, a sermon, a speech, must read like an EKG. I mean, for example, a good comedian will hit probably 4 to 6 punchlines a minute. A spike, a change. For the heart, it's an electromagnetic, that's a hard word, electromagnetic change. But in speaking, it's a change in what's happening. Now, why would we need to do that? Why do we need to have spikes placed throughout? Well, because human beings have pretty much the attention span of a goldfish. Now, that may sound crazy, but I actually did a little research on this. Time magazine recently published an article that showed that the impact of the digital world on the human brain was all about concentration. And human beings have lost concentration to the point where they can stay focused for approximately only 8 seconds. Think about that. 8 seconds. What is the attention span of a goldfish? 9 seconds. Okay, so what we're looking at is a short attention span in most folks. They're used to sound bites. They're used to engaging the world through the media. So we have to be able to hold them and keep their attention. And one important way to do this is through these spikes, these changes. Now, as I said, comedians can have 4 to 6 punchlines a minute. In speaking, in a comedy club, that's great, but in a pulpit or speaking, that's not what we're talking about. What I'm talking about is putting spikes like voice, silence, movement, or change of material. For example, with our voice, we can do so many different things that cause a spike, meaning a change that brings our audience back. If you're talking for a while, kind of same cadence, same level, you see people kind of going to their smartphone, starting to their grocery list, then stop. Slow down, or get in the mic and increase the volume. You can actually back off the mic and become softer. You can speed up to kind of match tension that might be in the message. You can mirror the message with your voice and use it to bring the audience back. Now, one of the aspects of sound to me that's most important is silence. We never use silence. We're kind of scared of silence, actually. I think that moment of pause is so beautiful. People aren't reading a book when they're listening to your sermon or your message. They can't stop and underline. They need a moment to process information. Think about it like when we were in school, or maybe I should say me, you might be doodling or not paying attention. Okay, again, on me. And all of a sudden, the teacher stops talking. And what do? You look up, because that silence brought you back. There's many versions of how one might use silence, and a number of examples given in the book. But in general, today, I just want to offer that as an idea of how in communication, we get people's attention and bring it back. Change of voice, use of silence, movement. Come out from behind the pulpit. I know many of us are manuscript preachers, but guess what? If you've got a story in that sermon, you don't need notes to tell a story. You get to that story, you've got it in your mind, you come out from behind that pulpit, you tell that story. It's intimate, it's honest. You grab the audience back, you come back to the pulpit and you keep going. Whether it's gestures, physical movement, moving out or in behind a pulpit or around or into the congregation, it grabs people's attention, brings them back. And last but not least, certainly a change of material. We might start out with a scripture. Then we might move into exegesis of that scripture. That might include quoting some type of theologian. Maybe then we go into a story that humanizes it. Then we shift into a statistic or something from the newspaper. All of these changes of material, again, spike in the information, spike in the experience, changes, brings people back. Now, one thing I like to do at the end is give myself an EKG test when I'm preparing a sermon. There's 2 ways I do it. One is before I give it, which is I take literally the manuscript of the sermon and I lay it out and I look and I put red checks by the spikes. Now, clearly it's hard to do that for the vocal and the movement, but the content, you can do it. You can see where are the changes in the EKG spikes right through it. And if they're not enough there, then I will weave some in to make sure the content has spikes in it. And then after I give it, I watch the video. Now, I know most folks don't like to watch themselves on video or listen. Guess what? We got to get over it. And if you're not videotaping yourself, Do it. Whether you're using a smartphone or go get something cheap at Staples, videotape yourself giving your communication, whether it's a sermon or a speech. And then do 2 tests. 1, watch it without the volume. See if your body language matches the message. See if there are spikes in the body language that bring the listener back. And then watch it without the visual. Just listen to it and see if the voice mirrors the message, right? So very important message. Number 2, you've got to make sure that you preach, you communicate like an EKG test. Commandment number 4, thou shalt be creative, or thou shalt get creative. Harvey Cox, who is a wonderful theologian from Harvard Seminary, said this: the task of theologians is not to come to terms with existing patterns of perception, but to explode them. To explode them. I think Jesus was the ultimate user of creativity in his preaching. And he used a formula that you see many comedians using, many speakers using, and it's this: a universal message hooked onto a memorable visual. Think about this. Universal message, for example, that wealth does not bring happiness or approval or pave the way to heaven, right? That's the universal message hooked onto a memorable visual, shoving a camel through the eye of a needle. I mean, you know, his first century audience grabbed that message and remembered it because it was familiar and it was anchored in something that they knew. I mean, if Jesus were around today, I think he would definitely, well, he is around today, but you know what I mean. He would definitely be a country music writer, because, honey, those country music writers have got it down. This whole universal message hooked onto a memorable visual. I mean, I bet you've all got your favorite titles. I love Velcro Arms, Teflon Heart. Does that sound familiar? I'd rather pass a kidney stone than another night with you. My all-time favorite. It's kind of edgy, but I like it. If I'd shot you when I wanted, I'd be out by now. Again, like really edited, funny, but yet universal message hooked onto a memorable visual. That's the whole ball game. You know, sometimes you have to push the line a little bit in doing it. I love this image. Look at the dog. Isn't that great? Sometimes we have to push the line a little bit. You know, in our particular church, we do a Good Friday service that's a country western service. Now, I know that doesn't sound at all rational, but then you think about it. What is Good Friday about? It's about pain. It's about angst. It's about worry. It's about death. Well, that's what most country music's about. So we frame the passion story around different country music songs. The passion story's read and a song is sung, passion story sung. And I have to tell you, when I first heard it, it broke open the passion story for me in a fresh way that I had never, ever experienced. It was wonderful. And it's because we pushed the line a little bit. There's a little handout that goes, that you can access online with this presentation, and it's got a bibliography. I would suggest a book by a professor I had. His name is Doug Adams. He taught at Berkeley at the Pacific School of Religion, and it's called There's a Prostitute in the Family Tree. And he talks about how you bring scripture to life. And he talks about it in very practical ways of how we can take these stories and bring them to life. And he talks about how kids, you know, in services are so clear about that they bring stories to us in such a fresh new way. We had one time in our church, I was trying to tell the story of Jonah, and I invited the kids up, and I said, why don't we do something different? Let's tell the story of Jonah from the perspective of the whale. And a little boy got up. I won't name names, but he comes in, and my first mistake was bringing him in the pulpit. Comes in the pulpit. My second mistake was putting him on the mic, like right there. And I said, okay, Johnny, tell everybody the story of Jonah from the perspective of the whale. And do you know he let out the biggest burp I've ever heard in my life? Like on the mic, through the system, stained glass windows were like echoing. It was horrible, kind of, and hilarious at the same time. Nothing like that had ever happened in this 170-year-old sanctuary. And what comes up at coffee hour? One of my senior members comes up and she goes, "That was the most interesting version of Jonah I've ever heard. I loved it." You never know. Sometimes you got to push the line a little bit, right? So number 4, you got to get creative. Just like in comedy, you've got to bring creativity and new ways of coming at things. Commandment 5, thou shalt find great material. Well, humor is like a muscle. Comedy is like a muscle. You've got to learn to use it just like you learn any other skill, like you learn any other thing in life. And when you start to use it, then you start to build your awareness. You start to see the world through the lens of humor. You start to think like a comedian. And there's 2 areas I want to cover briefly where you can find great material. One is the Bible. I mean, come on. There is some great, great stuff in there. Some of it's just straight obvious, like Sarah and Abraham. I mean, hello. God tells Sarah she's going to have a baby at 90. Really? And yet who has the last laugh? God. Because Sarah has the baby and names the baby Isaac, the Hebrew word for laughter. Pretty clear right there, right? I mean, my favorite, of course, I have my Bible. And you got to use the King James Version for this particular verse. But this is the story of when the Israelites and the Philistines went to war. And the Israelites asked God, "Are you okay if we fight these folks?" And God says, "Yeah, it's fine. It's cool. Just don't lose the Ark of the Covenant." I mean, obviously, I'm paraphrasing, okay? Anyway, they go to war. They lose the war. The Israelites lose to the Philistines. And all of a sudden, here we pick up 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 9, and the Philistines are carrying the ark back home. You ready? "And it was so that after the Philistines carried the ark about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a great destruction. And the Lord smote," love that word, "smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had hemorrhoids in their secret parts." I'm telling you, you can't make this up, right? 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 9. There's some obvious humor in this book. And then some of it is a bit contextual too. I mean, like Jesus' story of, if you're sued for your coat, give them your cloak too. The theologian Walter Wink did a great analysis about this and showed how that's hilarious for a couple of reasons. One, folks in first century Palestine only wore 2 pieces of clothing, a coat and a cloak. So if you're standing in court and being sued for your coat and you give them your coat and your cloak, you're standing there naked, which is kind of funny. I mean, you got to admit. But the real zinger is that in ancient Judaism, it's the one causing the shame that actually is shamed. So it's the creditor who is suing that actually is shamed. So it's this interesting reversal that we wouldn't get in 21st century America or anywhere because we don't understand the context. But the humor's there. We just have to mine it. So there's wonderful stories in the Bible, and I'm sure you have your favorites too. There's also great stories out in the world. I will share with you a sign that I saw literally just out in front of a gas station over the 4th of July. Look at this. Liquor and fireworks. What could go wrong? I mean, why would I include that? Well, think about where could you use that in a message? There's something funny to put in a sermon about all the things that could go wrong. A sermon on worry, a sermon on stress, right there by the side of the road. One of the things I try to do is leverage what you know. My husband, Toby, and I are big motorcycle riders. What is your hobby? What do you love to do? What are you passionate about? You know what? It rings so true when you talk about it publicly, whether it's in a stand-up routine or a sermon or a message. People can see that joy. It also is so authentic when you talk about it in terms of a message. I've given so many sermons on motorcycle experiences because not only is it authentic and true for me, but there's some great messages. Here's a really great one that I love. This is a parade in southern Minnesota. It's called the Standstill Parade. Why? Because you could notice on the far edges of the road, the old cars, the fire trucks, the majorettes, the bands, they're all parked by the side of the road. It's the crowd that walks by. So it's called the Standstill Parade. What would you use that for? Anything. If you can't preach that, honey, then you need to stop preaching. mean, think about it. Like, it's our time to move. You could access that and use it for a heavy, heavy social justice sermon. You could access it in terms of a sermon for, how we get stuck in life. Just, again, wonderful visuals and things out in the world. You just need to learn to see them. I'll just say this briefly. Keep records. If you see something that strikes you, write it down. Write it down. That was my phone, but I'm not going to take it. Sorry. Use the things that actually happen in the world and keep a record of it, whether it's on your phone or on like a little notebook. I carry a notebook because trust me, when you get home, you will have forgotten it. Write it down and keep a record so that you can access these for your sermons. Commandment number 6, thou shalt throw a party. Now, this sounds kind of funny. I happen to think, however, that throwing not only a comedy show or an event or a worship service, all of these is very much like putting on a cocktail party, which is hilarious because I'm Baptist, so that doesn't exactly fit, but hear me out. There's different stages of a party. Watch how this works. Pre-party planning, whether you're throwing a literal party or a show or a worship service, you think about who's coming. You think about your audience. A friend of mine used to call it, he used to say, put yourself behind the eyes of the audience before you put yourself in front of them. And think about that. Who's coming? What's on their plate? What keeps them up at night? Why are they worried? What burdens do they carry? What do they need, in the message? And I'm not saying preach directly to what people need, but you've got to know what keeps them up at night, because that is where the message actually starts to sing, when it meets the need of the people. I mean, I actually think about my congregation when I'm writing, and I picture who's on the front row, who's there. This person's dealing with cancer. This person's dealing with a teenager. This person's dealing with addiction. This person. And it informs how the message actually gets written. So you think about who's coming and how you best present the party to them. Know your audience. I'm going to Canada to do a preaching conference soon. I just did a little research. This is an example. Canadian protester. It's kind of funny, right? Anyway, know your audience. Day of the party, what do? You don't stand in your kitchen with the front door propped open. You stand at the door. You welcome people with a smile. It sounds so simple and basic, but we just don't always do that. I've got folks coming into my church who haven't been to church in 20 years, 10 years. They're walking in cold for the first time, and they've had bad experiences in the past, and they're scared. They don't know what to expect. And if they reach a church where the doors are closed or there are not people out front, they might just well as turn around and walk away. But we're out there with a smile, maybe a laugh, maybe a handshake, even a hug, and that warmth gives them the courage to walk in the door. It's just like you were opening your own home for giving a cocktail party or giving any kind of gathering, right? I think also being a great conversationalist is a huge piece of a worship service or any type of gathering that you're putting together. And let's just go through these bullet points briefly. You've got to look people in the eye when you're a great conversationalist. Don't you hate being at a party where somebody is looking over here the whole time, over your shoulder, to see who's like more fun to talk to? It's the exact same with the message. As I said earlier, some of us are manuscript preachers, but that doesn't mean that you have to stay on the paper the whole time. You can do, whether it's print in big print, circle main words, frame a story and just put story so that it's in your mind. You've got to come off that paper. You've got to keep eye contact, because that's where the power comes. I tend to do what I call quadrant eye contact. I'll break the congregation into fours. I'll pick one person in each quadrant and hit eyes with them. Even with just one person, it makes the entire 2 to 3 rows around and back feel like you're talking to them. Just don't do what I call the table fan, where you go, Jesus said, love thy neighbor. That didn't work. There's nothing personal about that, right? Just make sure that you actually look people in the eye. Also, be present. Be present. What does that mean? Well, so many things can go down in a service or in a speech or any kind of communication that you don't expect. a little baby starts crying, or, there's a siren outside. Or my favorite was a gentleman who was part of our congregation for a long time named Charlie McCarthy. He was, truly, that was his name. Charlie lived to 101, and he was very hard of hearing. And so always in the prayer, and always somehow it was in the really poignant part. Like there'd be a national disaster, and I would be saying, "Dear Lord, please pray for the people who are victims of," and Charlie would yell at the top of his lungs, "Lord, oh, you got to help the Mets." It'd be this long pause, and he goes, "Because they're awful. They stink. You got to help them." And I would wait till it died down, and then what are you going to say? Like, "Yes, Lord, the Mets are bad this year. Please help them." Which reminds us also to turn to our brothers and sisters who are in pain at blah. You got to be present and call it out. You can't be like a robot that's not there. People experienced it with you. Be present and call it out. Share the conversation. This goes back to the whole idea of silence. We call it in comedy holds. When an audience laughs, you hold and allow them to laugh. You don't step on their laugh. If you hit a punchline, people start laughing, and you jump in too soon, that's called stepping on the hold. And it's impolite, really. You want to let them laugh, and as a laugh arc goes, if it peaks here, about 2/3 of the way down, then you come back in. That way you get the energy off the laugh, but you don't interrupt their moment. It's about sharing the conversation. But this is a technical tool in stand-up that allows you to do that, right? I also use something called callbacks, which develops rapport and intimacy. I will plant a joke in the beginning, and then I will bring it back. For example, I said earlier about bless their hearts. I believe we were talking about the professors were not ready to teach theology to a comedian, and I said bless their hearts. I explain that to folks. I say, in the South, we have a little thing where you can say anything you want about anybody you want, as long as you end the phrase with bless their hearts. And then you bring it back. And once you bring it back in an unexpected place, then it bonds the audience, because all of a sudden it's something they remember, and it's like a little private joke. Finally, you feed them good food that they wouldn't otherwise get at home. I mean, people these days can Google anything they need, right? You could go online, you can do exegesis off of any scripture, but what you can't get online is a real life person, is someone who will listen to you, someone who will offer you love, see that you are there, note your presence, make you feel like you matter. That's what people don't get. And that's what we have to be open for and available for in a service. Post-party follow-up, pretty basic. Send them a thank you note. I do it as a comedian all the time. I do it as a performer all the time. As a minister, we send email follow-ups. Hey, thanks for coming to be with us today. It makes people feel included. So basic, but we don't always do it. Commandment 7, thou shalt not be a victim of identity theft. Well, what does that mean? Well, I'm not talking about identity theft in terms of like credit cards, although there's definitely that. I'm talking about it in terms of the dreaded heckler. You see these, I know these people. You may know these people too. The dreaded heckler, in a comedy club, these are folks that just want to take that person on stage down. They, I've heard things like, you're not funny, or keep your day job, or my personal favorite I heard in a club, just let us drink in peace. It's an awful feeling to have a heckler in the audience. But you know what I'm talking about. These are people who are just angry, or they're insecure, or they're frustrated, jealous comedians who just won't get on stage themselves. But it doesn't have to be in a comedy club. We have hecklers in all aspects of life. Maybe it's a congregation member that is just never happy. Or maybe it's a business colleague that we find intimidating, or, it doesn't matter. It only takes one, and then that heckler is in our head, and it's too late. There's something called the imposter syndrome. I think sometimes when that heckler in our head is so loud, we almost get paranoid. I love this image. I hope to God that's Batman. The imposter syndrome, we're paranoid. It's like oh my gosh, people, they think that I'm all this, and I'm not. I'm not as smart as people think. I'm not as capable as people think. I'm not this, that, this. And we just play a game in our heads. I heard an interview with Jesse Ventura, the ex-governor of Minnesota, and he said something poignant, maybe one of the few things I've heard that was poignant coming out of his mouth. But anyway, he said, we should make all politicians wear a NASCAR suit because then we will know who owns them. Isn't that great? And I thought that's so true for us too. Who owns us? Because we're all walking around with a NASCAR suit, with the big sponsors. The one that gives the most money is the largest sponsor, like Good Wrench right on the front. Who owns us? What's going on in our head? Who owns us up here? Because I'll tell you why it's important. What we believe up here drives over time our behavior. And our behavior over time drives who we become. So we have got to get a rein on this, what's going on in our head, who owns us, that heckler, because it will drive everything we do. I think Fred Craddock put it best. To refuse to use one's own language is a clear evidence of a lack of faith. Well, amen on that. This is about finding our authentic voice and holding on to it for dear life, not listening to those hecklers in the head, but knowing it's a gift that we must honor. Commandment 8, thou shalt not be exhausted by the Sabbath. Well, this is pretty clear. Comedy clubs, open mics will wear you down. But guess what? So will preaching every single week. Again, give me an amen on that. Because we all know, oh my Lord, a friend of mine I talked about, and I believe this was actually written somewhere. I should research, figure out where this is. But my friend used to use the phrase, the relentless onslaught of the Sabbath. That phrase just hit me like a ton of bricks because it's true. Over and over and over. And don't get me wrong, I love preaching. I love it. I love the creation process. I love the delivery process. But after, it will wear you down. Just like going into for a comedy club every week, you've got to find a way to take care of yourself. This is one of our signs. Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes. But we just have to find a way to take care of ourselves. I took a little drive to Alaska right before I started seminary. Problem is I didn't have a lot of money. So I started eating McDonald's a lot and putting cheap gas in the car. By the time I hit the Rockies, the car wasn't really going to make it over the mountains because it was sputtering so bad. And I couldn't fit in my clothes, which was a big deal because I was wearing like overalls. You see what I'm saying? Like, we want to go for the long haul. We can't unless we take care of ourselves. I love this sign. And I think it's just such great wisdom. The secret to living well and longer: eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. Isn't that the truth? Laughter is such an important part of taking care of ourselves. And in that handout that comes, that is part of this, I have a whole list of organizations that talk about the healing, physical healing, and psychological healing power of humor that I encourage you to check out and look at. But laughter is a critical tool. Of course, I'm biased, but I do believe psychologically, spiritually, and physically an important piece of us taking care of ourselves. I mean, in the end, sometimes we just got to let go of it all. You know this wonderful prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, there's a new version of it I wanted to share with you. It's called the senility prayer. God grant me the senility to forget those people I never liked anyway, the good fortune to run into those that I do, and the eyesight to tell the difference. Just got to take care of yourself, right? Commandment 9, thou shalt heal and achieve world peace through humor. I will just give you a quick snippet of what I'm talking about here. There's a lot more detail in the book. One of the comedy tours I'm on is called Laugh and Peace, and it's me, a rabbi, and a Muslim comic together on stage. Started right after 9/11. And in that tour, we use humor to build bridges, not break people down. And the three of us present not our religious beliefs, but our lives. What is it like to be a Muslim in America? Asar says, I don't understand why you get upset, y'all get upset having to be at the airport 2 hours ahead of time. I've got to be there 2 months ahead of time. The Rabbi Bob talks about learning classical Hebrew. And he says, I went to Tel Aviv after seminary and I was excited to try out my Hebrew, got in a cab and said, please let me off here. The driver said, do you know what you just said? Bob goes, no. And he goes, what you just said is, behold, here I descend. You don't have to be Jewish to understand that. You don't have to be Muslim to understand the airport thing. It's all about common everyday things that bond us as human beings. Now, if you can laugh with someone, whether it's a stranger, an enemy, or a family member, in that moment, our worlds overlap for a split second. And that's when the commonalities gleam through. This piece, to me, is one of the more important of building community, of pastoral care, of actually putting the word of the church out into the world. And I encourage you, again, you can write me and I can send you more resources, but there's more in the book and there will be a lot more on the course about reconciliation and bridge building through humor. And last but not least, thou shalt bring joyous communication. When I was studying stand-up with my stand-up coach at the American Comedy Institute, this was his best lesson. He said, 5 minutes before you go on stage, put down the notes, put down all the work, forget it. You've already done the work. Sit down and think to yourself, there's nowhere else I'd rather be than this comedy show tonight. There is no other audience I'd rather be talking to. I have such great stuff to share with them. They're going to love it. It's going to lift them up. It's going to make them laugh. And he called that joyous communication. His whole point was, we have to bring the tone. We walk out on that stage, and if you bring a tone of joyous communication, honey, that audience will feed it right back. And I think that's so true in terms of sermons and messages too. What we bring to that pulpit, what we bring to that mic, the audience sends it right back. I mean, in the body of Christ, we are the funny bone. We talked about the gospel being good news. That's the bottom line. It's good news that we're sharing. So let's find a way to share that in a positive, joyous, hopeful way. I'll leave you with this beautiful Jewish prayer. Days pass and years vanish, and we walk sightless among miracles. This is about remembering what we were called to do, remembering the power that we have as human beings and as pastors. You know, Joan Chittister, the beautiful Benedictine monk, said, we have the potential to be the human beat of the heart of God. And that's what I'm talking about, is to access that potential, the gifts we were given, and use them to lift up the world, lift up our communities, lift up our family, and lift up ourselves so that we can leave the world just a little bit better, one smile at a time. I'm so glad that you joined me today. We've got, looks like about 8 minutes left for questions. So I'd love to open that up if anyone has any comments or questions or things to share.
Thank you, Susan. And again, to our participants, if you scroll to the bottom of your page, there's a Q&A box. Some of you have already entered a few things of affirmation, Susan, saying thank you and amen to all that you said. So that's nice. Others, if you have questions or comments that you'd like to make, then just put those in down there. Susan, let me ask this. Sometimes the humor does give credibility, but also there's a little bit of a fear that if I'm just seen as funny, then I'm not going to be taken seriously. So can you address that? Like maybe that's one reason humor isn't used as much in the pulpit?
Yeah, well, there's, that raises two things, Rick, and thanks for asking that. One is, I think people worry that humor is seen as kind of fluffy. It reduces the message down to some type of unworthy common line. And the bottom line is, to me, humor is the one thing that it kind of, it's like the, what am I saying? Oh my gosh, I'm completely drawing a blank. It's like it boosts the message. It brings, the whole message is about joy and hope, and this is what boosts that into it. It actually is like the thing that bootstraps it where it needs to be, because it's one thing to be serious and somber and powerful, which there's an appropriate place for, but why would we not want to open our hearts and our souls to show the full side of humanity when we're in the pulpit, so that people not only get to know us, but get to see the message in a lighter, joyous way. And humor also, I think, allows us to get into the difficult topics where we otherwise might be a little reticent to go. Sometimes, we don't want to talk about difficult issues of the day, things in the newspaper, issues of social justice. But if you can get trust and rapport right up front through a story or something that allows people to laugh, and engage that issue in a little bit less threatening way, then you can go. And they've got trust and rapport that's right there. And I'd add this, Rick, also, I'm a big believer that humor can also be dangerous, and you have to be careful with the power. I draw a circle around myself, and anything in that circle is fair game. Women, pastors, redheads, people that wear cowboy boots, Baptists, New Yorkers, Southerners, whatever. But the second I step out of that circle is where it gets dangerous, where I start going after folks or making fun of folks that are not in my circle. Then it can be perceived as something that's that is drawing a difference, drawing a line as opposed to building a bridge. I mean, there's enough material in my circle that could last for like 10 lifetimes. So why would I go anywhere else, you know?
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah, yeah. The comments we've gotten are basically, thanks. One person says, I give an amen to all you've offered today. Another says, wonderful presentation, ordering the book. Another says, thanks for arranging this. Thanks, Susan, for such an excellent hour. So a lot of affirmation. You're onto something here, it sounds like.
Good. Well, I'm so glad that people came to join us today. And Rick, thank you for the opportunity through Cooperative Baptist Fellowship of North Carolina to present this.
Yeah. So if people wanted more information from you or from, I think you're on your next slide, you've got
look at that.
How to contact you. So
yes, you can go. I've got it at my website, susansparks.com. This is the church's website, so you can get information in terms of, we live stream our sermons. We've got all kind of different information about some of the ways that we are presenting the message through our platform. And keep an eye out for the Preaching Punchlines e-course in January, which I hope you might consider taking.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. I really appreciate your time and your expertise and how you packaged it for us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. Good to talk to you.
You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody.